Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Beacon Stack webinar on 7 ways brands can use Beacon Tech in 2016. Thank you all for joining us from all parts of the world, and I know it's pretty late for some of you. So without much ado, let's get started. I'm joined today by my colleague, Perry Nunes, who's the marketing associate at Mobstack. Welcome, Perry. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you, Neha. It's really good to be here, and I'm excited to discuss a lot of the interesting things we've been seeing happening with beacons. It's looking like so far 2016 is shaping up to be a huge year for the space. So before we get going, I'd like to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page regarding beacon technology. I know that many of you have tuned into past webinars or maybe done some of your own independent research on beacons, but it's good to kind of get a baseline understanding before we dive into some of the more high-end strategies. So beacons themselves are low-cost, low-power transmitters that are equipped with what's called Bluetooth Low Energy or BLE technology. You might have heard it called Bluetooth 4.0 or Bluetooth Smart. And basically, these pieces of hardware, often very small, will transmit this Bluetooth Low Energy radio transmission around them to a certain proximity radius. And then this in turn helps mobile devices to detect proximity and determine microlocation. So rather than other location-based services such as maybe GPS that determine an exact location for a device based off latitude and longitude values, this is actually based off of a relative location, which is computed by the proximity of the device to the beacon hardware. This is nice because it makes it a little bit more energy efficient. It doesn't drain the battery like something like GPS might, that's using satellites and calculating exact location, which makes it a really suitable and effective tool for brands and retailers to use for proximity-based marketing. A bit more on how the beacon works. It's important to note that beacons don't actually transmit content, but instead, in this radio transmission, they transmit a series of identifying numbers. So that transmitted signal then allows another device, a mobile device, to decode that transmission and to identify that specific beacon, and therefore determine, based off the signal strength, the device's proximity to that beacon, which can be used to do a lot of very interesting things by rules that you set to be triggered when that device is in proximity of a beacon. Now that we've kind of built that understanding, a bit about what today's webinar specifically will be on. First, my colleague Neha will dive into why beacons are huge right now and why, going into 2016, it's really important for brands to start understanding and piloting and eventually deploying beacon technology. We'll then go on to both share some common myths and misconceptions and hopefully kind of sort those out, how beacon technology actually works and how it can actually be used. We'll talk about how brands can make the most of beacons in 2016. And we'll also offer some examples that we think have effectively employed those strategies in 2015 and in the past. We'll highlight 2 of our favorite iBeacon campaigns from 2015. And then lastly, we'll talk about some do's and don'ts for your iBeacon campaigns as you plan, pilot, and then deploy. So Neha, do you want to start us off with some reasons why we should really be paying attention to beacons right now?
Yep, sure, Perry. Thanks for that. So to start with, let's look at why beacons are a big deal right now and why experts feel that 2016 is the year of the beacon. First up, we have this stat on the number of retailers that are planning to invest in beacons. That's a whopping 85% of retailers of the top 100 retailers are planning to invest in beacons in 2016. The next stat that I have for you is that beacons will drive around $44 billion in retail sales this year, which is up from $4 billion in 2015. That's a 11x increase in the revenue from beacons in retail, and it's a great sign for retailers planning to invest in beacon technology. Don't you think so, Perry?
Wow, 11x, yeah, definitely.
The next one is particularly interesting. Beacons have led to an 8% increase in in-store visits at offline stores via retargeting. Now, this stat is very interesting given the debate around brick and mortar stores, whether they'll survive the competition from e-commerce or not. Beacons come as a relief for such retailers because they now know that they have enough scope to engage customers in the right manner via retargeting, via personalization, and they can actually lead to an increase in the store visits at their offline stores. So I think this is a very good sign for retailers who have brick and mortar stores. Next up, we have 89% of consumers are willing to share their personal information in exchange for targeted content. I'm sure a lot of you must be surprised with this stat. I can see Perry looking quite surprised as well. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of misconception around consumers not being okay or comfortable with the idea of being targeted with personalized content. The truth is, they would love to receive such offers or personalized content in lieu of personal information if it is at the right time, at the right place, and it's based on some contextual data. So I think this again is a great sign for retailers to, plan their campaigns in a way where their audience really benefits from the kind of campaigns they plan for their customers. So next up, I think Perry will try and shatter some myths around beacons. So let's get started with that.
Yeah, thanks, Neha. And to your last point, I definitely myself, when I'm shopping online, I don't mind the targeted offers because of this level of sophistication in a lot of the campaigns. And I think beacons, as you've talked about, allow brick and mortar stores to bring that level of sophistication and context to their in-store retargeting. So that's a really good point. You definitely got my eyebrow raised with that statistic. I'm peaked. Myth number one, though, moving on to some of the myths. We touched on this a bit when we were talking about kind of the basics of beacon technology. A lot of people think that all of the content, all of the offers, the promotions, the interactive content actually lives in the beacon. But that's not true. The beacons themselves only broadcast basic identifying numbers. There are three main numbers called a UUID number, a major number, and a minor number. And then those basic identifying numbers are then received by a smartphone, and specifically the mobile application on a smartphone. It's then that mobile application on that smartphone that then detects that beacon specific serial number and then will trigger a set of pre-configured actions based on what's programmed in that app. So the app is really the smart part of the beacon strategy. The beacon itself is just there to let the app know that it is there and the app is in proximity. So you can program, as we'll talk about, a lot of different interesting actions, so to speak, in that mobile app when in proximity of the beacon.
That's a great thing you pointed out, Perry. It's the app really that does a lot of work, whereas beacons just transmit signals. I would like to start with that when I talk about the next myth, which is that beacons can collect information without users' consent. This is a very, very common misconception around beacons. The truth is, beacons are transmit only. They do not receive or collect signals from mobile devices, they just emit signals. And it's the app that really responds to these signals in a predetermined manner according to whatever the settings are in the app. So there's no question of beacons really tracking customers. Also, for a beacon enabled app to work, the app seeks users' permission to access location services, and this also is opt in. So, if there are customers who are wary of sharing their information or who don't want to receive beacon messages, they can simply choose to not opt in. It's as simple as that. So, all these questions about privacy and security, I think they are really blown out of proportion when it comes to beacons. What's the next myth you want to talk
Okay,
about?
so this one we've heard a lot as well. That beacons themselves provide an infinite range. That they're transmitting signal infinitely, and by their very design, this is not true. Beacons transmit a finite range up, and we'll go into kind of what those ranges are. And then it's that range that allows the beacon to determine the proximity or the relative proximity of a mobile device when that device enters the range. Um, this range is really highly dependent on the battery that's powering the beacons, but we've seen that for beacons that run on AA batteries, the typical range shows up to about 50 to 120 feet, whereas the range for smartphones or tablets, when they're made to act as beacons and transmit their own BLE signal, that can be up to about 150 to 200 feet, which makes those a nice alternative for maybe some longer range use cases.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. The next myth we're trying to shatter here is that beacons can pinpoint location data with precise accuracy. Well, sure enough, beacons are accurate, more accurate than GPS, and that's the reason they are in vogue. But the signal strength from a beacon is not directly proportional to the distance of the beacon from a detecting app. Though it's directly proportional to, say, a distance of around 10 feet, but when it goes beyond that, this correlation between the signal strength and the distance of the beacon from an app drops off exponentially. So if you have an app that takes into account the distance of a beacon and obviously have an app which triggers actions based on signal strength or distance from the beacon, you need to account for this very fact. it's not always directly proportional. You need to take care of that. What do we have next, Perry?
Yeah,
Okay.
so we've covered kind of the four very common myths that we hear a lot regarding beacons, and so now we're going to dive really into kind of the meat of today's webinar. What you all came here to hear: how brands themselves can make the most of beacons. So the first way that we really feel brands can do this is to find a good balance between push and pull with coupons. So often when people hear proximity marketing or beacon technology, they think of what we call pushing coupons, which means that a brand automatically delivers a coupon or say another piece of content when a mobile device is in proximity to the beacon. However, there's also an alternative to this called polling a beacon or poll, in which a user must actually take a certain action in addition to simply being in proximity of a beacon, such as maybe walking extremely close to a very visible beacon or performing a certain action on their mobile device to then actually trigger that content and get to engage with that content. This strategy of polling gives the user more control as part of the proximity marketing strategy and makes them a bit more comfortable because they can decide what types of content is delivered and when. But it does inherently mean that you're reaching a smaller audience. So it is important, as we've said here, to strive for a balance between both push and pull with coupons. A recent study actually showed that 1.6 billion coupons are set to be delivered annually to customers via iBeacon technology by the year 2020. So that stat alone shows the huge potential of push with coupons. However, on the flip side, marketers should be careful with their beacon strategies because it's also been found that with each additional beacon message, marketers risk a 313% drop in app usage. So as we'll talk about a bit later, if you're bombarding your users with too frequent or irrelevant offers, they'll simply shut off the app or disengage with the strategy altogether. A good example of a brand that's really struck this balance very well is Chinese jewelry brand Chow Tai Fook, in which they deployed beacons across 237 stores to push coupons via the WeChat app, which is a popular messaging chat app in China. So on one level, I found this personally unique. Naya and I were talking about this earlier. This was a brilliant strategy in that rather than developing their own app, they actually integrated with an existing app, the WeChat app, which had a very strong brand, a strong mobile presence, and they integrated their strategy with that app. In addition to this, they also incorporated a poll component to the coupons in that there was a certain feature of the WeChat app called the shake feature, in which if a user had the WeChat app in proximity to the beacon, they would have to shake their phone, and when they shook their phone, that's when they would actually be prompted to redeem a coupon. And they saw that customers were really responding to this well. On the whole, the redemption rate was about 59%, and they were finding that on average, people were shaking roughly 4.76 times in store, so almost 5 times. As a whole, this was a wild success. Actually, the whole campaign went to generate sales of just over about $16 million.
Oh, that's great. I mean, these are very interesting insights, Perry, and I didn't really know so much about pull-based marketing. Thanks for that. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is, what beacons can do with, what brands can do with beacons in 2016. A great way to use beacons this year is to enable mobile payments. As you would know, a lot of brands are already jumping the beacon bandwagon when it comes to mobile payment options, because simply for the fact that it makes the shopping experience so much more faster and so much more convenient. If you look at the stat that we shared here, US, the proximity marketing mobile payment transaction value has actually gone up from $8.71 billion in 2015 to $27.05 billion in 2016, expected to grow up to that much in 2016. That's a whopping 210% growth in total value of payments. And this number is actually expected to grow up to $210 billions in 2019. Those are some really staggering numbers. What do you think, Barry?
Yeah, wow.
So, as an example, I would like to talk about a very famous Danish bank called Danske. So, what they really did was they partnered with Go Appified and Net Clearance Systems to integrate beacons with their app, which is called the Mobile Pay app. So, what the app really did was it helped to accelerate the checkout process for mobile users at more than 100 retail stores across the Nordics. And through this, they were able to reach the 3 million user mark in Denmark. and this was a huge success. And I think this, mobile payment in general is a space to really watch out for in 2016.
That's a good point, Naya. And when in talking about mobile payments and proximity payments, you kind of brought up a second point on accident in that beacons are often used and thought about in proximity marketing, but they do have several use cases for brands outside of pure marketing. Proximity payments being one. To my next point as well, kind of goes hand in hand with marketing, but it's its own strategy in itself. Is beacons can really be used to provide seamless customer loyalty using beacons. Uh, for all the brands and retailers out there listening, the loyalty is a big buzzword and very important, near and dear to our hearts. Because we're finding that a consumer's decision today, more and more, and to buy and interact with your brand, is often based a lot on the ability of you, the brand, to reward them for their time and money spent in the past. In fact, 61% of brands reported that repeat customers drive more than half of their revenue, rather than the new ones. So building customer loyalty and maintaining and reminding your customers of their loyalty points is really, really important, which beacons can help with. One app did this really well. We saw Wisely, which is a customer loyalty application that helps to link restaurant staff to its guests using beacon technology. So this is a kind of a twofold benefit for both people involved in the transaction. For one, on the business point of view, the app will alert staff that are working in a restaurant about a new guest's arrival to the restaurant, and then we'll also pull up a brief profile on that person that may include, his or her dining preferences, what they ordered last time, how much they've spent in the past, and how many loyalty points they've accrued, and then that can help them to tailor more, individualized service to that person when they're in the store or in the restaurant in this case. From a customer's point of view, it's also a really enhanced user experience, and that customers, rather than punching a loyalty rewards card like it was in the good old days, they can actually earn loyalty levels automatically and keep it automatically tracked and automatically reminding them on where they stand. So these levels can range from your silver, your gold, your platinum levels, and then based off that automatically tracked loyalty level, they'll get to claim really unique rewards right there when they're in the restaurant, ready to buy when it matters most. So this might include flash deals on a certain meal or a certain product, one-on-one tasting sessions that are special to that specific day when they're in the restaurant, among many other tailored recommendations based off their history and their profile.
Oh wow, those were some really interesting insights, Perry. Thanks for that. So the next one I want to talk about is gamification. I think gamification is a great way to engage customers and generate brand awareness, and especially with so much of competition and the dwindling attention spans of customers, I think it's really essential that brands find a way to engage customers just at the right time, and it's a great way to distinguish themselves from their competitors. A very interesting stat here is that the retail adoption of gamification strategy specifically is expected to rise by about 181% in the next 5 years. That's a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And another study from Gartner says that gamification will be an essential part for brands to drive customer loyalty in 2016. We just had the CES 2016, and we saw how popular gamification was. And as more and more brands try to incorporate it in their apps, I'm sure this is going to have a huge impact in the kind of response brands get from customers in terms of their app experience. So the example I want to talk about here is that of the beacon crawl. So what really happened here is a few pubs in lower New York use beacons to gamify the traditional pub crawling experience. So as part of the beacon pub crawl, they place beacons at various sponsor venues and other locations. And what they really did was they guided crawlers to secret locations where they were greeted with welcome notifications, clues to unlock special drinks, or other kinds of offers via beacons. To enhance this, the whole engagement thing further, they also awarded crawlers for completing tasks such as sharing content on social media, meeting other crawlers, ordering food, etc. So, just by incentivizing users for being part of the crawl experience, they actually got a lot of more hits on social media, and they were able to generate a lot of brand awareness. using this technique. I think this is something that brands should really watch out for. Gamification in 2016.
Definitely gamification and restaurants and bars. It's best of both worlds.
Yeah, what more could you expect?
Also, I want to add another really important way that brands can make the most of beacons is to connect users with each other passively, both at the right time and the right place, using proximity beacon technology. We've seen a really good example with a Switzerland-based app called Blink, which helped to bring real-life context to the online dating experience. So what they did is they created something that might have been obvious in the past, but no one had really capitalized on it. And that was the synergy between a lot of these dating apps out there and a lot of these nightlife venues, these bars, these nightclubs, these restaurants. And so what Blink did was it alerts people in real time who have that both have the app downloaded on their phone if there are other singles that fit certain criteria that are in the same location, so the same bar, the same other nightlife venue, via a feature they like to call InstaConnect. So say you're on the latest beacon crawl and you're looking for love. This is a really good feature and a really good app that helps to kind of enhance your user experience while you're out and about at night. Also, though, from a business point of view, this InstaConnect feature is incredibly powerful as well because it gives a lot of insight into the profiles and the types of people that are visiting and engaging with their brand there in the venue. Secondly, though, there's actually a whole different feature, which is called the hotspot feature, in which it lists out various bars and clubs and other venues that are trending based on the distance from that person to the venues, the activity at that venue, among other information. And so this is a really good example of how the specific app layered beacon technology with another technology, in this case, location services via GPS, to really provide a nice kind of two-pronged strategy to engage the customers. So on one end, GPS location services got to drive footfall to certain bars that were that wanted more activity or that fit their specific geographic location and interests. And then once those people were actually in the venue, beacon technology kind of took over in terms of offering proximity-based context and enhancing the user experience through that InstaConnect feature that we had previously mentioned.
Oh wow, that was a great example, Perry. I was not aware of so many apps that have a two-faced interface with their own staff and visitors as well. This is the second example of such type you've mentioned.
That's right.
That's great. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is brands leveraging beacons to understand the needs of their customers. So as you would know, beacons are really helpful in gaining very useful insights about their customers, what they like, what are their preferences, what is their dwell time in front of a particular section, or what kind of messages they prefer, things like that. So I think in 2016, brands are really going to leverage analytics to gain insights on various metrics. The example I would like to talk about is Sail Amsterdam, which is the largest public event in the Netherlands and the largest nautical event in the world. So what they really did was they used 232 beacons across 5 beacon networks to cover the entire venue. As a result, they were able to gain insights on visitor distribution, the popular routes, most popular notifications, and other things. So as I share in the next slide, some of the analytics they collected show that promotional and informative notifications saw a lower open rate when compared to insights about ships. I'm sure this is not something that they were expecting, but having beacons installed, they were able to access such detailed analytics about the way their consumers were interacting with various notifications. Using these insights, they were able to offer a much better visitor experience to people who had visited the event. And I think this is a great example of using beacons in the right manner rather than just pushing offers. They were able to enhance the whole experience, and that is what using beacon tech in 2016 is going to be more about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Neha. I think the analytics side of things is an often overlooked aspect of beacons, and so it's good that we've, in both of our examples, really touched on the power of analytics, proximity analytics, in addition to proximity marketing.
Okay, before we go to the next point, I would ask our attendees to really please type in your questions if you have any, and we'll try and answer them at the end of the webinar. Please type your questions in the question window that you'll see on the console. Thank you.
Thanks, Neha. And then also, in our last campaign, or I guess our last strategy that brands can use is to integrate with digital signage to allow brands to have more impactful advertising. So digital signage, as its name suggests, is taking out of home advertising and billboards and other public places and turning it digital, which then in turn allows brands to match their specific target audience with the right message at the right time in the right place. We saw one of my favorite Beacon campaigns implement this very well, in which an alcohol provider, Diageo, partnered with various London pubs to run an out-of-home campaign for Pimm's liqueur at various transit hubs in London. So what they did was they were able to leverage a Beacon network and various nearby neighborhood pubs, which themselves acted, again, as we touched on, to track analytics, specifically on football and the rush, so to speak, at those various venues. And then if there were nearby pubs that had availability that were serving Pimm's liqueur at various transit hubs such as bus stations, it would then direct people and say, you know, enjoy a Pimm's today at this XYZ pub nearby. But what I thought was particularly ingenious about this, and this gave Neha and I a pretty good laugh, was that in addition to the context based off geographical proximity using beacons, they also tapped into weather information. So say that it was over 16 degrees Celsius, which that brand particularly deemed as a warm day, then it would change the actual copy on that digital signage and say cool off with a glass of Pimm's. Which I thought was a really unique personalization that we haven't seen a lot of, but I think we're going to start seeing more and more of using beacon technology combined with other information.
Okay, so next we talk about our favorite iBeacon campaigns of 2015. This was a very tough choice to make because considering this, there were so many. One of my favorites was how Real Madrid used beacons to target fans during their China tour. So what Real Madrid really did was very intelligent of them. They deployed beacons in stadiums and they pushed content to their fans. The fans, in response, they shared this content on various social media channels. So essentially, they translated offline interactions with fans during matches into online interactions without really going social themselves. So the fans who interacted with the Beacon broadcasted content and shared the content on their own WeChat or Weibo social media channels, but then entered into a prize draw. This was a very innovative way to generate a lot of brand awareness, a lot of buzz around the event without actually doing anything on social media. The campaign, as you would know, was very, very popular and it drove a viewership of content of around 8 million, which is huge, isn't it? What do you
Wow,
say?
yeah.
I think it was a great event for Real Madrid fans.
Personally, I'm an FC Barcelona fan,
Okay.
but I'll give it to them for the pure execution of the campaign.
Okay, we don't have a fan turn it around on their team.
So my personal favorite, which I think was one of the best iBeacon campaigns for 2015, was used by actually very popular U.S. country group Zac Brown Band, in which they use beacons to engage concertgoers with interactive contextual content. So this specifically happened back in September at their 9/11 show up at Wrigley Field, where Zac Brown Band used beacons who had the Zac Brown Band live app and asked them to support a nonprofit called Warriors to Summits, which is a nonprofit that empowers veterans and their families, very suiting for the occasion of the show. We saw this as a really powerful kind of breaking into new ground with beacons, in that it was the first major musical artist to use beacons at one of their shows. And I think it's a really good example that when we say brands using beacons, that's not only retail brands or restaurants or hospitality, but also several events and venues can really be using beacons to add interactivity and even drive sales. So we expect to see a lot more of this happening in the event space in 2016, whether that's more concerts, whether that's sports venues, maybe conferences, trade shows, and I think, and you can add to this, Neha, that it's not only going to drive sales on merchandising and donations, but it can also make the events a lot more interactive.
Yeah, surely. I mean, I'm sure 2016 will see a lot of more innovative applications of the technology rather than just driving sales. I'm really excited about this space. Moving on, I think we'll go ahead to the do's and don'ts for iBeacon campaigns. I'd like to talk about the do's if you don't mind, Perry.
No, not at
You
all.
can go ahead with the don'ts. Okay, so first up, I think the most important part is to run a beacon pilot before going live. This is something that our customers keep asking us. Is it really so important to go ahead with a beacon pilot? And we say it's really important because in a beacon pilot you can test with a limited audience at a few locations and get all sorts of feedback and try and incorporate that feedback and also know the kind of messages that work for you, the kind of beacon placement that works for you, what kind of beacons work for you, and whether they actually make sense for your business at all. So once you have all these data points, you can take an informed decision based on the feedback and everything, and then maybe deploy it on large scale and then go live with your beacon campaign. So beacon pilot is a must in our opinion. The next important thing is seeking content before accessing user information, going on the same lines for privacy and security issues. I think this is really important. So before you take a user consent on accessing location services, say you should let them know why you're using beacons or what kind of information you're collecting and how you're going to use that information. Is it to enhance experience, or will you put them in a draw or something like that? It's really important to let your customers know, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to share their information. The third thing is to set a threshold time for messages. I think this is really important considering the stat that Perry shared. There's a risk of 313% risk of people deleting your app once they've downloaded it if you bombard them with a lot of messages. So you need to find the right interval to send messages to them, and our personal suggestion would be to not send more than 2 to 3 beacon messages per visit. I think 3 is the maximum. Try and stick to 2. That makes more sense for a customer who's coming to your store, and if you're engaging them, they'll definitely come back again. Okay, so the do's don'ts, Perry.
Yeah, definitely. In addition to not doing what Neha did not say, I will add some three of our biggest don'ts. One of those is, and it's kind of been a continuous thread throughout today's webinar, is don't only use beacons to sell to customers. Don't only use it to push coupons or even pull coupons. The beacons open up a whole world of possibilities in general to enhance user experiences. Neha and I have both touched on these kind of throughout tonight's webinar, whether that's reminding customers of their loyalty automatically, whether that's sending them interactive content at event venues or other spaces, or also even to connect people in real time with customer service or sales staff. Beacons don't have to replace the in-store shopping experience. They should actually enhance the in-store shopping experience. Secondly, as Neha has mentioned, in addition to not wanting to bombard customers with too frequent of offers, you also want to make sure that you're not bombarding customers with irrelevant offers. A lot of the power of beacons is the power of context. So you should really tap into that context and strategically use information to offer relevant offers, both based off where a person is inside your store or inside your location, but also based off information from that customer, the past shopping behaviors, what types of preferences they might have, etc. And then lastly, I do want to mention that you don't want to be keeping your customer data into different silos. And so what that means is that many of you out there as brands probably already have some sort of system, some sort of database of customer information. And so as you add in beacon technology and proximity technology to your strategy, it's important not to keep those different databases separate. You want to have an integration of your proximity data and your other client data. So as you're working with your technology teams, it's important to configure it so that all of your data is combining together to supplement one another rather than kind of competing or acting in separate channels altogether.
Oh, that's nice. Those were some really interesting and very useful tips from you, Perry. Thanks for that.
Great. So we're winding down the webinar. Tonight we've talked a lot about beacons. We've gone over the basics. We've dispelled some of those common myths. We talked about 7 of our most recommended ways that brands can really enhance the customer experience with beacons, and then gone over some of the do's and don'ts. So now we want to talk about, you're ready to get going. You know about beacons. You have an idea of how you want to use them, but how do you get started? At Beacon Stack specifically, we realize that this initial step is sometimes tricky because you have hardware and software, and so we actually compiled a series of beacon kits that give you everything you need to get started, all in one package that all works very nicely together. So this includes enterprise grade beacons. So that's the actual beacon hardware. We have 3 different kits, which we'll go into just a bit, that come with different numbers of beacons. And we'll talk about how each of those different kits can be used in a bit. In addition to the beacon hardware, we also offer the Beacon Stack app. This app is really good because it helps you to configure and manage your beacons, but also for those of you out there who haven't fully developed your own mobile application, or you don't want to yet integrate our SDKs into that mobile application for just a very simple demo, the Beacon Stack app also serves as a nice application to do a nice internal demo and see some pre-configured and personalized campaigns actually show up on the app. And then lastly, and I would say arguably most importantly, by ordering a kit, you also get access to our cloud-based proximity marketing analytics platform called Beacon Stack, the Beacon Stack platform. So this is kind of your one-stop shop for everything Beacon campaign related. So this is where you can create your Beacon campaigns, you can build customized content, set rules to trigger certain actions when a mobile device is in proximity of beacons. You can manage all those campaigns and then finally actually track analytics all on that Beacon Stack platform. So it's these 3 components, the hardware, the Beacon Stack app, and the Beacon Stack platform that come as part of these Beacon Stack kits. As I mentioned, there are 3 Beacon Stack kits, and the difference between them, they all come with the Beacon Stack app and access to the platform, but the number of beacons in each of the kits varies from one to another. The first one is a starter kit, and so for $89, you get 3 beacons, as well as the app and the platform. The pilot kit, for $199, you get 9 beacons in addition to the app and the platform. And then lastly, the deployment kit for $699, you get 30 beacons. So the starter is really good for those internal demos if you don't really know what's going on with beacon technology and you want to just tinker on a very basic level. The pilot kit is really good for small pilots, and we specifically really highly recommend this for a lot of you out there. You understand the basics of beacon technology. You have a lot of really good ideas. We've given you several ideas of successful use cases, and it really does take nine beacons or so to really create a sophisticated enough demo and pilot to really see how Beacon Stack can help you achieve your specific use case. And then lastly, the deployment kit has 30 beacons, and that's for maybe once you've run a pilot and you're ready to scale to a deployment in maybe one of your stores, your restaurants, one of your locations. The deployment kit's a really good place to go for that. I do want to note that the pilot kit is currently discounted. It's typically $249, and we've slashed off $50 of that price, which is 30% off for this week only. So definitely, if you're thinking about organizing a pilot going into Q1 2016, the pilot kit's a really good way to go.
Okay, yeah. So we've been receiving a lot of questions from our attendees. So I'll like to talk about the first few questions we've received. So the first one being, what are the metrics that matter to retailers? Well, with beacons, there are a number of metrics that you can really measure. The things that come on the top of my mind right now are, footfall metrics, where you can actually find the number of unique visitors or the outside potential, say, number of people passing outside your store that you could actually use beacon messages to get inside your store and make them your customers really. Customer path metrics, which could involve what are the most popular paths in your store. Zone interdependence, which is do women generally shop for bags and then belts in that order, or how that makes a difference. And zone dwell times, what is the amount of time people spend in different zones in your store. You can also capture loyalty metrics, which is the number of recurring visits you get from visitors, or what is the visit frequency, or what is the time spent by your most loyal customers. And you can use all of this data to really target these customers in the right manner and at the right time to reap the benefits of using analytics in your store. So
Great. Thank you, Neha. Yeah, there are a lot of important metrics to track, and depending on your use case, you can determine which ones to prioritize and which ones not. The second question is a really good one. How difficult is it to add beacon technology and location networks to an existing app? So first off, for the person who asked this question, congratulations that you have an existing app. That's a first crucial component of the beacon strategy. And specifically, in terms of integrating beacon technology, typically you integrate an SDK. At Beacon Stack, we have our own SDK, or software development kit, that you must integrate into your app, which makes it compatible with both our hardware and our platform. And actually, once you order a kit, you also get access to the Beacon Stack SDKs for iOS and Android. And we have significant developer documentation, which with a little bit of help from a developer, in about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on complexity, you'll be able to complete that integration and get your beacon enabled app up and running, to perform whatever use case that might be.
Oh, thanks for that, Perry. So the next one we have is, how do you see Eddystone beacons playing into all of this? Well, personally, I think, though Eddystone was launched with a lot of fanfare, I don't see really a much happening on that front as of today. And given a choice, I would always prefer going with Beacon rather than Eddystone beacons, primarily for the fact that I can target customers in a much more organized manner using my own app, knowing which customers I really want to send a message to, rather than sending a blanket URL to all customers. And another important thing to note here is that there's a very common misconception around Eddystone beacons, that they do not need an app to interact with, which is not really true. In case of iOS devices, you need to have a Chrome browser with the Today notification on your iOS device for an app to really, for a URL to actually open in the notification center view. Also, in case of Android devices, there's only this physical web browser that is capable of receiving such URLs. Given all that, and we recently, actually today, published a blog just to figure out, to mention the differences between iBeacon and Eddystone, to make customers understand what the difference really is. And having said that, I think beacons is all about user personalizing the experience. So rather than sending a blanket URL to all customers, I think it's much more important to tailor messages according to preferences and past history, loyalty, etc., and make the most of the data you have around your customers.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you for clearing that up. I know that in a lot of the conversations I've been having, people have been a bit confused on what Eddystone can do, what the limitations are. So I appreciate your in-depth knowledge on that. And then the last question for tonight, the fourth question, someone has asked, what are the popular use cases of digital signage? Really good question. And as we mentioned, I think digital signage is going to be a really up-and-coming use case for brands in 2016. We touched on the one use case earlier in the webinar, in which there was a campaign of various transport hubs using PIMs, and that was unique, and that represents kind of one strategy with digital signage of using beacons in nearby venues, and then based off that intelligence and analytics from those in venue beacons to then communicate with the digital signage display, and then reflect the copy accordingly. Whereas another kind of the flip side of that is to have beacons themselves at the digital signage display, so that when users with a mobile app walk by the digital signage sign itself, they'll see customized, tailored content to themselves based off their own in-app information. We saw a really good use case of this with the apparel brand Levi Strauss & Co. that leveraged beacon-enabled billboards as part of a kind of a reintroduction campaign called the Live in Levi's. The brand used beacons to communicate with their best customers, which self-selects people with mobile apps. So whenever they interacted with someone with a mobile app that was near a beacon-enabled billboard, that prompted them with an offer that drove them to a nearby retail store. So this campaign, which is I think a really ingenious and very simple use case of digital signage, helped an established brand to kind of reintroduce itself to some of its most loyal customers with beacons themselves at the billboard itself.
Yeah, thanks for that, Perry. I think the Live in Levi's campaign was a really interesting one, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more such implementations in 2016. So I think we're running out of time here. That's it we had from our end. If you have any more questions, do feel free to mail Perry or me with your questions, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. If you have any questions regarding the pilot kit or the Beacon starter kit, you can always use the chat window on our blogs and the website. Okay, so thank you all for being accompanying us on this webinar, and bye. Good night from
Yes, good
us.
night. Good night from us, and have a great day.